Welcome to this journey through time, dear listener. Whether you're nestled comfortably in bed, settling into your favorite chair, or perhaps taking a peaceful evening stroll, I'm delighted you've chosen to spend this quiet moment with me exploring history's fascinating chapters. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from and what time of day it is for you. Feel free to share in the comments below. There's something wonderful about connecting our global community of night owls and history enthusiasts. If you find these gentle explorations through the past as soothing as I do, please consider subscribing so you never miss our peaceful wanderings through yesteryear. Tonight, we're venturing into an era that challenges every modern comfort we take for granted. Picture, if you will, a world without electricity, without running water, without the countless conveniences that make our daily lives effortless. This is the medieval world, spanning roughly from the 5th to the 15th centuries, a time that would test the very limits of what you think you could endure. The harsh reality is simple. You wouldn't last a day in medieval times. Not because you lack courage or strength, but because every aspect of daily existence in that era was a constant battle against forces we can barely comprehend today. Let us begin with the most fundamental human need: food. Imagine opening your refrigerator tomorrow morning only to find it empty, not just of leftovers, but of the very concept of refrigeration itself. In medieval times, food preservation was a desperate gamble against time and decay. There were no supermarkets with gleaming aisles of fresh produce from around the world, no frozen sections, no canned goods with expiration dates years in the future. Instead, the medieval diet was a monotonous cycle of coarse bread, thin vegetable soup called pottage, and if you were fortunate, the occasional scrap of salted meat. The bread itself was often adulterated with sawdust, chalk, or ground acorns by unscrupulous bakers looking to stretch their meagre flour supplies. Water was frequently contaminated, forcing people to drink weak ale or wine even as children, not for pleasure, but for survival. The wealthy might feast on elaborate dishes, flavored with exotic spices worth their weight in gold, but for the common person, a pinch of salt was luxury. Imagine never tasting chocolate, never knowing the sweetness of tropical fruits, never experiencing the simple pleasure of ice cream on a summer day. Seasonal eating wasn't a trendy lifestyle choice. It was the only option, and when winter arrived, fresh food simply vanished. But food was just the beginning of your troubles. Let's talk about your living situation. Forget your comfortable home with its temperature control and private spaces. Medieval housing for most people meant a single room shared with your entire family, and often your livestock as well. Animals were brought indoors not just for their own protection, but because their body heat was one of the few sources of warmth available. The floors were packed dirt, covered with straw that served as both carpet and toilet for the animals. Privacy was an unknown concept. Windows were mere holes in the walls, covered with shutters that blocked out both cold and light. When darkness fell, your only illumination came from flickering candles or oil lamps that filled the air with smoke and the constant risk of fire. Speaking of hygiene, prepare yourself for a shock. Bathing was not a daily ritual. It wasn't even a weekly one. Most people might bathe a handful of times per year, if that. The prevailing belief was that frequent bathing was actually dangerous, opening the pores to disease and corruption. Instead of showers, people might splash some water on their hands and face, change their undergarments occasionally, and hope for the best. The result was a population constantly plagued by lice, fleas, and skin diseases. Dental care consisted of pulling out rotten teeth without anesthesia. Deodorant didn't exist, and the accumulated smell of unwashed bodies, animal waste, rotting food, and general decay created an olfactory assault that would overwhelm any modern person within minutes. Disease stalked every medieval community like a hungry predator. Without understanding of germs or basic sanitation, plague and pestilence spread with terrifying efficiency. The Black Death alone killed an estimated 30 to 60% of Europe's population in the 14th century. Imagine a world where a simple cut could mean death from infection, where childhood diseases claimed half of all children before their 5th birthday, where women faced a significant chance of dying in childbirth. Medical treatment was often worse than the disease itself. Doctors believed in balancing the 4 bodily humours through bloodletting, purging, and other harmful practices. Surgery was performed without anesthesia or antiseptics. A broken bone might heal crooked, leaving you permanently disabled. Eyeglasses weren't invented until the late 13th century, so poor vision meant a life of squinting and stumbling. The social structure would be equally alien to you. If you were born a peasant, you remained a peasant. Social mobility was virtually non-existent. You were bound to the land, little better than property yourself, owing labour and crops to your feudal lord. You couldn't leave without permission, couldn't choose your occupation, couldn't even marry without your lord's consent. Justice was swift, brutal, and often arbitrary. Punishments included public humiliation in stocks, flogging, mutilation, or execution for crimes that today would merit a fine. Trial by ordeal meant proving your innocence by surviving torture, carrying a red-hot iron bar, plunging your hand into boiling water, or being thrown into a river where sinking proved innocence and floating proved guilt. Work was backbreaking and endless. Most people laboured from sunrise to sunset 6 days a week, with only Sunday offering a brief respite. There were no labour laws, no safety regulations, no workers' compensation. Agricultural work meant following a plough pulled by oxen, harvesting grain with hand tools, and hoping the weather cooperated. Craft work was equally demanding. Blacksmiths worked over blazing forges, miners descended into dangerous tunnels, and construction workers built massive cathedrals and castles with only human muscle and simple machines. Women faced additional hardships. They had virtually no rights, couldn't own property, and were expected to be completely subservient to their fathers and then their husbands. Education was reserved for the wealthy and the clergy. Most people couldn't read or write, limiting their understanding of the world beyond their immediate village. Entertainment was scarce and simple. There was no television, no internet, no books for the common person. Music and storytelling provided occasional relief, along with seasonal festivals and religious holidays. But these brief moments of joy were overshadowed by the constant struggle for survival. The weather was your master in ways we can barely comprehend today. There was no weather forecast, no emergency services, no heated shelters. A harsh winter could mean starvation, while storms could destroy crops and homes with no insurance or government aid to help rebuild. The Little Ice Age that began in the 14th century brought even harsher conditions, with shorter growing seasons and more frequent famines. Travel was dangerous and slow. Roads were little more than muddy tracks filled with bandits, wild animals, and the ever-present risk of getting lost. Most people never ventured more than a few miles from their birthplace. News travelled at the speed of a walking messenger, meaning you might not learn of major events for weeks or months. Even the concept of time was different. Without clocks, people lived by the rhythm of the sun and the seasons. The church bells marked the hours for prayer, but precise timekeeping was impossible. Your entire schedule revolved around natural light, making winter days short and limiting productive hours. The psychological toll would be enormous. The constant threat of death, disease, and disaster created a mindset focused entirely on survival. Depression and anxiety, while not understood as medical conditions, were widespread. The average life expectancy was around 30 years, meaning most people were either struggling children or prematurely aged adults. Religious faith provided some comfort, but it also brought its own burdens. The church demanded strict adherence to complex rules, regular fasting, and significant financial contributions. Questioning religious authority was heresy, punishable by excommunication or death. The fear of eternal damnation was as real and present as the fear of earthly suffering. Consider the simple act of cooking a meal. Without gas or electric stoves, every meal required building and maintaining a fire. Fuel was expensive and sometimes scarce. Cooking pots were few and precious. Recipes were passed down orally, with no standardized measurements or cooking times. A poorly cooked meal could literally kill you through food poisoning. Even basic communication would challenge you. If you spoke modern English, you'd be largely incomprehensible to medieval people. The language has evolved dramatically over the centuries. Most people spoke only their local dialect, making travel even more difficult. Latin was the language of the educated, but education was a luxury few could afford. The lack of artificial light meant that productive hours were strictly limited. When the sun set, work essentially stopped. Candles and oil were expensive, so most people simply went to bed when darkness fell. This created a rhythm of life completely foreign to our 24-hour, always illuminated modern world. Personal safety was a constant concern. Violence was common and often accepted. Duels, brawls, and blood feuds were regular occurrences. There was no police force to call, no emergency services to summon. If someone attacked you, your only recourse was to fight back or hope your neighbors would help. The medieval world would assault every one of your senses in ways you couldn't imagine. The smell of human and animal waste, rotting food, and unwashed bodies would be overwhelming. The sounds of suffering, people groaning from untreated injuries, children crying from hunger, animals in distress, would be constant. The sight of poverty, disease, and death would surround you daily. Yet perhaps the most challenging aspect would be the complete absence of hope for improvement. In our modern world, we assume that tomorrow might be better than today, that innovation and progress will solve our problems. Medieval people lived with the understanding that their children would face the same hardships they did, that suffering was not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be endured. The few who did live comfortably, the nobility and high clergy, did so on the backs of countless others who suffered in silence. Even they faced constant threats from disease, war, and political intrigue. A king might live in a castle, but he could still die from a simple infection or fall victim to a rival's sword. As we drift towards sleep in our comfortable modern beds, with clean sheets, climate control, and the security of knowing that help is just a phone call away, let us appreciate the incredible journey humanity has taken. The medieval world was not a romantic era of knights and princesses, but a harsh testing ground where simply surviving another day was an achievement worthy of celebration. Every convenience you enjoy, from the clean water flowing from your tap to the electricity powering your devices, from the food in your refrigerator to the medicine in your cabinet, represents centuries of human progress, innovation, and the gradual triumph over the brutal realities that once defined daily life. So as you close your eyes tonight, safe and comfortable in ways your medieval ancestors could never have imagined, remember their struggles and sacrifices. Their resilience in the face of unimaginable hardship paved the way for the world we now inhabit. Sleep well, knowing that you live in an age of miracles they could only dream of, and that tomorrow will indeed be better than today. Rest peacefully, dear listener, in the knowledge that you've survived the gentle journey through one of history's most challenging eras, and wake refreshed in a world they helped build through their endurance and hope.